Mary Chieffo brings a whole new style of Klingon in Star Trek, Lower Decks Season 5. Chieffo originally portrayed Ril, who became Chancellor of the Klingon Empire, in Star Trek, Discovery's first 2 seasons. In Star Trek, Lower Decks Season 5, the USS Cerritos investigates rifts in space that lead to alternate Star Trek timelines. One such breach in space brought Lieutenants Beckett Mariner, Tawny Newsome, and Brad Ward Boimler, Jack Quaid, to the Klingon home world in Star Trek, Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 4, A Farewell to Farms. Mariner met up with her old friend Ma, John Curry, who was tempted by a lusty Klingon woman named Kalera, Mary Chieffo. Screen Rant chatted with Mary Chieffo about playing a Star Trek, the Next Generation era Klingon in Star Trek, Lower Decks, her Star Trek, Discovery memories, what she thinks happened to Chancellor Ril, and whether Ril could have been part of Star Trek, Section 31. Mary Chieffo on getting cast as a new Klingon in Star Trek, Lower Decks Season 5. Chieffo is modern Star Trek's most prominent Klingon actress. Let me give you your flowers, because you are the most prominent Klingon actor in this era of Star Trek, and you are certainly the most important woman to play a Klingon since Discovery started. Mary Chieffo, it was such a thrill. They reached out, and I was out of town. And it was just the most delightful thing to be like, oh yes, I would love to come in and be a different Klingon. And I'm such a fan of Lower Decks. I think they just do such great stuff. Mike, McMahon, and Brad, Winters, have always been so lovely, and I've just always enjoyed their company. And so, this moment was so perfect. They were like, wait a minute, we need a lady Klingon. We know a lady Klingon. I did get to do Ril's voice on Star Trek Online, as I said, and that was great to continue on with her voice. But to then get to do a new Klingon of this era was just such a delight. It's such a great comedy. They just write it so sharply. It just all made sense. When I got the lines, I was like, oh yes, this is a lady. The differences between Kalera in Star Trek, Lower Decks and Ril in Discovery. Chancellor Ril never had a boob window. The first thing I noticed about Kalera, when I realized it was you doing the voice, is that you didn't have Klingon teeth to talk through like you did with Ril, right? I was like, wait, Mary sounds different. And it took me a minute to put it together. So tell me about playing a Klingon without the prosthetics where you're just doing the voice. Mary Chieffo, totally, yeah, without the prosthetics, without the teeth, without the accent. For Ril, I developed such a specific dialect based off of the fact that we were speaking so much Klingon. Those Klingon hadn't been exposed to the Federation English. Kalera is from the TNG era, so I really got to have it be closer to that more heightened Shakespearean dialect. And I let her have a little bit more of Mary's flavor in a certain way, which I delighted in. I think again, having done all the different Klingon research in the past and looked at all the different Klingon women, I did really try and pull from different elements. And when I was in the recording booth, Brad and I had so much fun playing with the sultry moments where she really does get into the sexy talk, and then when it gets really gruff. It was really fun to play with a different from Ril, but still very Klingon energy. My favorite line was when Mariner goes, "What crawled up her boob window?" Refresh my memory, but Ril didn't have one, right? Mary Chieffo, no boob window. My first Chancellor Copper dress did have a nice, long V-line. Laughs, we joked that it was like she was setting the precedent. But no, I did not ever have an official boob window, so I'm glad that I have fulfilled that legacy as well. What could have happened to Ril and her family after Star Trek, Discovery? Was Chancellor Ril erased from Klingon history? As you mentioned, you played Ril in the first 2 seasons of Discovery and Star Trek Online. Do you have any headcanon about what you think happened to Ril, Ash Tyler, and Tenavik? Mary Chieffo, I love that question. A lot of what they played with in Star Trek Online was very cool. They kind of went a little bit more with Tenavik and bringing me back. It's a completely different timeline. So I thought that was very fun. But for me, it's the question I love to pose. And I felt this from the beginning with Ril, even before she became Chancellor, with all of the characters we were playing on Discovery in the first 2 seasons. You kind of have this question mark of why aren't they referenced in the future? And obviously, we got a huge part of that answered at the end of Season 2 for everyone, but for Rel to be Chancellor, I do think it is quite prescient. Why do so many female leaders get forgotten and erased from history? I would love to see what could have possibly happened. How long did she reign? And is it just that they kind of take her for granted at a certain point, or was there some sort of coup? I do think there's a lot of potential, but I've always been really fascinated by the question of what could have happened. Because something happened that didn't allow her to be spoken of in the future. Obviously, we know because the shows were written beforehand, but I think that's the fun of any sort of prequel. We do get to ask that question and maybe investigate it. I can only imagine, given Rel's track record on the show, I'm sure it's probably a very tragic reason. I can only imagine it getting a little more Greek and a little more Shakespearean. And speaking of Tinovic, I think the episode with him is just so incredibly beautiful. The tragedy, I would love to imagine a world where Rel does finally get to be reunited with him as an adult. I would love that. There are a couple of seasons of Strange New Worlds coming up. Maybe they'll touch on it. It's the same era. I'm also so excited for Section 31. Originally it was supposed to be a TV show. Were you ever in the loop about maybe a part in that before it became a movie? Mary Chieffo, no, I wasn't. I mean, I thought it was a great idea. I think it is awesome to explore that world. Rel obviously had a lot of interactions with Giorgio, and took some fair amount of advice from her too. But alas, no Rel in Section 31. Star Trek, Discovery's Klingon were from a different sect. Discovery's Klingon had a backstory the show didn't fully expand upon. We haven't seen the Discovery Klingon in years, and I was thinking about Starfleet Academy, and I wish they would do Klingon 101 and canonically explain all the different types. Just sort of all out for the cadets in the future. I remember you once said that your Klingon were from a different sect. Mary Chieffo, yes, when we first were exploring it in the very first episodes with Tkevma, they were a kind of a more ancient race or legacy. That was what Tkevma found to be true. And he created this sarcophagus ship, the Ship of the Dead. And I really loved that. I remember we had some in-depth conversations, even in the rehearsals before we filmed anything, about how he had been ostracized as a Klingon, and wanted to create a space for other Klingon that had been not taken seriously and not respected.